Cringe culture is killing creativity, and there is nowhere that it is more obvious than in knitting. Before Instagram, the knitting world prioritized unique designs, creative approaches to creating something that you already knew how to make, learning new skills, really puzzling and delighting through a pattern. And today, it feels like we're just creating copycats of the same beige raglan over and over and over. I think the main culprit as to why knitting has experienced such a dramatic shift over the last 15 years or so can be pinned on cringe culture. Cringe culture is about policing enthusiasm. Being too into anything is seen as cringy, so people play it safe. They never want to express too much excitement or too much enthusiasm about anything. And I totally get it, because if I grew up with everything I did being filmed, recorded, replayed, remembered, looked at over and over again, I would also be really cautious about the way I presented myself to the world. So how is cringe culture playing out in knitting today? Well, first, we're seeing a lot of the same shapes over and over again. Seamless top-down raglans in super neutral shades, very wearable pieces, basically pullovers and some small scarves. Now, I do think there's some practicality to knitting very wearable, store-bought looking, socially acceptable pieces, right? If you're putting the amount of time and energy and money into knitting a whole sweater, it should be something that you're going to wear, but it also leads to a lack of knitting innovation. Now, I think of the late 90s through the 2010s as kind of a golden age of knitting, because the internet was around. We were able to blog and share ideas and make the original knitting podcasts, which were audio only. We were able to share techniques and get new ideas and inspiration, but Instagram hadn't yet come about. And the rise of the aesthetic feed and the way that we visually present ourselves to the internet, the motivation by clicks, likes, follows, subscribes, didn't feel quite as strong. There wasn't an algorithm to homogenize our style. And the great era of the knitting hustle, which I think came after 2010, where a lot of knitters were trying to monetize their craft, that hadn't quite come about yet. People were sharing ideas for the sake of sharing ideas. They were creating designs that would really inspire other people, and often they were available for free. We had the new girl Zooey Deschanel era of modcloth style, if you remember modcloth, of put a bird on it.
We're gonna put birds on things. Put a bird on it. Put a bird on this teapot.
I know, I'll put a bird on it.
Put this bird right on this card.
Which was actually, it was not really ironic. Everything had birds on it. We had mustaches on everything. Being different, being a little quirky, it was celebrated. And was it cringy? Like, yeah, it was a little bit cringy, but I kind of love and miss that not giving a hoot energy of the early 2000s. My case study for the uniqueness of knitting going away really lives in Rhinebeck. This past Rhinebeck, 2024, I was shocked by how many people were wearing the same sweater. I think I saw hundreds of Andrea Mowry's framed sweater as I walked around Rhinebeck. And I have no hate for Andrea Mowry. I think she's an incredible designer. People absolutely love her designs. My first times attending Rhinebeck in 2010 and 2011, everyone was wearing different sweaters. And it was really inspiring to look around and see hundreds and hundreds of different designs on different people. Yes, groups of friends would all do knit-alongs and knit the same sweater together, but it was nothing like it is today, where everyone seems to be wearing the same sweater. And I would get so inspired and tons of ideas and start tons of conversations with people, going up to them and saying, I love your sweater. What's that pattern called? I want to make it too. It felt almost dystopian to show up at Rhinebeck this year and see hordes of women wearing the same sweater, because that homogeneity, it was just counter to the spirit of the knitting world that I experienced when I first learned how to knit. Today, it feels like patterns are really focused on monetizing. What's going to sell the most? What's going to make the most money, the most hustle, and that's where the focus goes. Let's dive into a couple of examples of my favorite designers and patterns from the early 2000s, how I think they're emblematic of this innovative knitting spirit that maybe we've lost a little bit of, many of whose patterns are still available for free online today. Now, the first knitter who I think is really emblematic of this era is Bordhi. And Bordhi is an absolute legend. She and Elizabeth Zimmerman are the only two knitwear designers that I'm aware of who had obituaries in the New York Times. So she's legendary. Her anemone hat is just like exactly what I think of when I think of the vibe and the energy of early 2000s knitwear design. Now, this pattern came out in 2011, and Bordhi is inventing and creating an entirely new idea here. It's extremely fun to knit. It is super quirky and fun to wear, great for all ages, and it's definitely a showstopper. And also, I bet some of you might be thinking, I would never wear that. That's cringy, that's weird, I don't like it, and that's exactly what I'm talking about, you guys. Instead of trying to blend in and look store-bought, Kat Bordhi's anemone hat is fun. It's sculptural, it's unafraid of looking silly. This hat pattern and its success and love was only possible in that quirky era of the early 2000s where cringe didn't exist. Because of that, we had lots of new, fun, creative things to explore through our knitting and many other realms. Let's look at another example that I think is a little bit more wearable in today's cringe culture world. Cookie A was the queen of sock designs in the early 2000s, but by far her most popular design was the monkey sock. Cookie A created socks that were really puzzles for knitters. They had unique constructions, unique designs. She was really revolutionizing sock knitting. But Cookie A and her amazing sock designs were only possible in a world in which there was a ton of variety of different patterns that used different constructions, different techniques, different approaches. If Cookie A was knitting a variation on the same seamless top-down raglan or the same vanilla sock over and over and over, she would never have the foundation and diversity of skills needed to create a unique and innovative design like the monkey or her many other amazing sock designs. This pattern was published in 2006 in Knitty, an entirely free online magazine that still exists today, but let's be honest with each other, its heyday and its time to shine really was the early 2000s, 2000 to 2010-ish era. Back in the early 2000s, I can't overstate how exciting Knitty was. We couldn't wait for the new Knitty drop. The fact that it was free isn't by chance, because the hustle culture that we see in knitting today, where everyone's trying to monetize their hobby and make a buck, that was really not a thing as much, but we were really trying to show and impress other knitters by cool and unique discoveries and designs in knitting, and not necessarily to monetize a pattern that would sell the most to the most people. Any pattern that was published in Knitty was guaranteed to be tech edited by the magazine, and everything was free, so there were no surprises. You knew what you were getting into before you even started, and because of that, you were kind of guaranteed a good experience when you were knitting a pattern from Knitty. There was nothing to hide. Today, there are knitwear designers, and I have a whole other video on this, so I'll put a little card here, but there are knitwear designers that are putting patterns out that aren't very well written and that are very difficult to follow for a variety of reasons. Some of that is monetization, but they're able to hide behind beautiful aesthetic photography and vibes. And because they're hidden behind a paywall, you don't know that you're buying a bad pattern until you've purchased it or maybe even started knitting it. That was not the case with Knitty. So let's take a step back to cringe culture. Why does cringe culture stifle knitting patterns and knitting innovation? Because you have to be obsessed, absorbed, excited, intrigued by something in order to really dive into it and get really good. You can't get to a place where you're writing excellent, innovative patterns if you haven't been obsessed with, absorbed by that thing leading up to your creation in it. I promise that Beethoven, Da Vinci, they weren't scared of looking too into the thing that they were doing, and they wouldn't have become Beethoven or Da Vinci if they hadn't really been absorbed by and obsessed with their craft. Beethoven never said, nah, I'm not gonna practice today. I'm not that into it. It's whatever. Greatness often comes from caring so much, maybe even caring too much, but greatness rarely comes from being apathetic. And that's where cringe culture leaves us. Now, I can confess that the lack of cringe culture in the early 2000s enabled me to become the knitter I am today because I cared maybe a little too much, and I was a little bit obsessed. It led to internships, it led to a professional career, it led to tons of friendships in real life and online, and it led to a new hobby today, which is content creation around knitting, and none of that would have happened if I was too scared to be excited about knitting. I have a whole video about that story that I can link here as well if you're curious about my professional experience in the world of knitting. So what's at stake? What's the risk as cringe culture invades the knitting world? Well, the homogeneity of knitting patterns that we're seeing today, and I'm sure everyone is aware of it, it's definitely leading to an innovation gap. New knitters are missing the experimentation and the innovation of the patterns of the early 2000s, and because of that, they're not really being pushed to learn a whole host of new skills. That golden age of knitting, where we were sharing ideas like we never could before because of the internet, where we were seeing tons of innovation and tons of skill building, has come to a halt. Knitters are stalling at a beginner or advanced beginner level, even with a closet full of hand knit sweaters, because all of those sweaters are minuscule variations on the one that came before it. There isn't a whole lot of innovation to be found, and with it, there isn't a whole lot of new skills to be found. I'm not saying that this is limited to the knitting world. It's like seeing the same movies being remade over and over again, the same New York Times bestselling books turned into movies. Like, we're not seeing so many new movies because studios want a guaranteed success so they can make the most money. And it feels like that's what's happening with knitting patterns too. I want to do the same thing that X, Y, and Z knitter did because they made a lot of money off of their patterns, and I want to do that too. So hustle culture really plays a role here as well. So my challenge for you, knit the weird thing. There is tons of original, innovative content from the early 2000s still available online, much of it for free. Look back through the back issues of Knitty, find something that speaks to you. If you're curious, I have a video coming out after this one that's going to be my favorite innovative patterns from the early 2000s, so you can subscribe, follow, bell, whatever you need to do to make sure you don't miss that one, because that's going to go through my 10 favorite kind of tropes of knitting from the early 2000s. It's okay to care a lot about something that is important to you, and it's okay to have a hobby that you're excited about. And if you participate in normalizing enthusiasm and in minimizing a need for a homogenous, beige, aesthetic Instagram feed, in leaving behind cringe culture, in forgetting about it, you yourself are participating in bringing back and pushing forward the golden age of knitting, where we can share ideas and use them to innovate rather than use them to copycat. Let me know down below if you were around and on the internet during this golden age of knitting in the early 2000s, if you see the change that I've noticed, and if so, which designer or pattern is your favorite from that golden age? It was really nice talking about knitting with you all today. Thanks for being here, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Bye.